This conference will now be recorded.
Hare Krishna. Welcome to our online Bhagavad Gita reading retreat lab. So today we will start reading Bhagavad Gita chapter 1. So before we go to the Veda base, so we will see the mind map for this chapter. So the chapter 1 then is entitled as Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kurukshetra. So this chapter has total 46 verses and we have two major sections. The first section is observing the armies, the verse number 1 to verse number 27. And in the second section, we will be seeing Arjuna's lamentation, that is your verse number 28 to verse number 46. So today we will start with the verse number 1 to verse number 13, which is basically the preparations for the war. So let's then get started. Chapter 1, Observing the Armies on the Battlefield of Kurukshetra. So we will go verse by verse and we'll be reading only the translation and purport. Chapter 1, verse 1. Translation. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after my sons and the sons of Pandu assembled in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, desiring to fight, what did they do? Purport. Bhagavad Gita is the widely read theistic science summarized in the Gita Mahatmya, glorification of the Gita. There it says that one should read Bhagavad Gita very scrutinizingly with the help of a person who is a devotee of Sri Krishna and try to understand it without personally motivated interpretations. The example of clear understanding is there in the Bhagavad Gita itself, in the way the teaching is understood by Arjuna, who heard the Gita directly from the Lord. If someone is fortunate enough to understand the Bhagavad Gita in that line of disciplic succession without motivated interpretation, then he surpasses all studies of Vedic wisdom and all scriptures of the world. One will find in the Bhagavad Gita all that is contained in other scriptures, but the reader will also find things which are not to be found elsewhere. That is the specific standard of the Gita. It is a perfect theistic science because it is directly spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. The topics discussed by Dhritarashtra and Sanjay, as described in the Mahabharata, form the basis principle of for this great philosophy. It is understood that this philosophy evolved on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, which is a sacred place of pilgrimage from the immemorial time of the Vedic age. It was spoken by the Lord when he was present personally on this planet for the guidance of mankind. The word Dharmakshetra, a place where religious rituals are performed, is significant because on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present on the side of Arjuna. Dhritarashtra, the father of the Kurus, was highly doubtful about the possibility of his son's ultimate victory. In his doubt, he inquired from his secretary Sanjay, what did they do? He was confident that both his sons and the sons of his younger brother Pandu were assembled in that field of Kurukshetra for a determined engagement of the war. Still, his inquiry is significant. He didn't want a compromise between the cousins and brothers, and he wanted to be sure of the fate of his sons of the battlefield. Because the battle was arranged to be fought at Kurukshetra, which is mentioned elsewhere in the Vedas as a place of worship, even for the denizens of heaven. Dhritarashtra became very fearful about the influence of the holy place on the outcome of the battle. He knew very well that this could influenced Arjuna and the sons of Pandu favorably, because by nature they were all virtuous. Sanjay was a student of Vyasa, and therefore, by the mercy of Vyasa, Sanjay was able to envision the battlefield of Kurukshetra even while he was in the room of Dhritarashtra. And so, about the situation on the battlefield. Both the Pandavas and the sons of Dhritarashtra belong to the same family, but Dhritarashtra's mind is disclosed herein. He is deliberately claimed only his sons as gurus, and he separated the sons of Pandu from the family heritage. One can thus understand the specific position of Dhritarashtra in his relationship with his nephews, the sons of Pandu. As in the paddy field, the unnecessary plants are taken out. So it is expected from the very beginning of these topics that in the religious field of Kurukshetra, where the father of religion, Sri Krishna, was present, the unwanted plants like the Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhan and others would be wiped out, and the thoroughly religious persons headed by Yudhishthira would be established by the Lord. This is the significance of the words Dharmakshetre and Kurukshetre, apart from their historical and Vedic importance. So just to summarize, in this first verse we have seen, so blind Dhritarashtra, how he is partial to his own sons. He inquires what his sons and Pandavas did on the battlefield. So he was very much partial to his sons and separated his nephews, the Pandavas, although they belong to both the family. So let's see now go to the here also we have seen the very nice analogy. So just like we have seen Krishna's plan, just as in a paddy field, which is basically Kshetra, unnecessary weeds are taken out. Similarly, in the religious field of Kurukshetra, in the presence of the father of religion, Krishna, unwanted harmful weeds like Dhritarashtra's son would be wiped out. So the rest of the chapter is Sanjay's description of the scene on the battlefield in the response to Dhritarashtra's inquiry. He first described the acts of Duryodhana, who didn't have any intentions to compromise in the battle as feared by the Dhritarashtra. So now let's move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 2. Translation. Sanjay said, O king, after looking over the army arranged in military formation by the sons of Pandu, King Duryodhan went to his teacher and spoke the following words. Purport. Dhritarashtra was blind from birth. Unfortunately, he was also bereft of spiritual vision. He knew very well that his sons were equally blind in the matter of religion, and he was sure that they could never reach an understanding with the Pandavas, who were all pious in birth. Still, he was doubtful about the influence of the place of pilgrimage, and Sanjay could understand his motive in asking about the situation on the battlefield. Sanjay wanted, therefore, to encourage the despondent king and thus assured him that his sons were not going to make any sort of compromise under the influence of the holy place. Sanjay therefore informed the king that his son Duryodhan, after seeing the military force of the Pandavas, at once went to the commander in chief Dronacharya to inform him of the real position. Although Duryodhan is mentioned as the king, he still had to go to the commander on account of the seriousness of the situation. He was therefore quite fit to be a politician, but Duryodhana's diplomatic veneer couldn't disguise the fear he felt when he saw the military arrangement of the Pandavas. Now we'll move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 3. Translation. O my teacher, behold the great army of the sons of Pandu, so expertly arranged by your intelligent disciple, the son of Drupada. Purport. Duryodhan, a great diplomat, wanted to point out the defects of Dronacharya, the great Brahmana commander in chief. Dronacharya had some political quarrel with King Drupada, the father of Draupadi, who was Arjuna's wife. As a result of this quarrel, Drupada performed a great sacrifice by which he received the benediction of having a son who would be able to kill Dronacharya. Dronacharya knew this perfectly well, and yet, as a liberal Brahmana, he didn't hesitate to impart all his military secrets when the son of Drupada, Drishtadyumna, was entrusted to him for military education. Now, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Drishtadyumna took the side of the Pandavas, and it was he who arranged for their military phalanx after having learned the art from Dronacharya. Duryodhan pointed out this mistake of Dronacharya so that he might be alert and uncompromising in the fighting. By this, he wanted to point out also that he should not be similarly lenient in battle against the Pandavas, who were also Dronacharya's affectionate students. Arjuna, especially, was his most affectionate and brilliant student. Duryodhan also warned that such leniency in the fight would lead to defeat. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 4. Translation. Here in this army, many heroic men equal in fighting to Bhima and Arjuna, great fighters like Duryodhana, Virata, and Drupada. Purport. Even though Drishtadyumna was not a very important obstacle in the face of Dronacharya's very great power in the military art, there were many others who were causes of fear. They are mentioned by Duryodhana as a great stumbling blocks on the path of victory because each and every one of them was as formidable as Bhima and Arjuna. He knew the strength of Bhima and Arjuna, and thus he compared the others with them. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 5. Translation. There are also great heroic powerful fighters like Drishtaketu, Shakitana, Kasiraj, Urujit, Kunti Bhoja, and Saibya. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 6. Translation. There are the mighty Yudhamanyu, the very powerful Uttamaja, the son of Subhadra, and the sons of Draupadi. All these warriors are great chariot fighters. We will move to now next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 7. Translation. But for your information, O best of the Brahmanas, let me tell you about the captains who were especially qualified to lead my military force. Now, move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 8. Translation. There are personalities like you, Bhisma, Karna, Rupa, Aswathama, Vikarna, and the son of Samadata called Hurisrava, who are always victorious in the battle. Purport. Duryodhana mentions the exceptional heroes in the battle, all of whom are ever victorious. Vikarna is the brother of Duryodhana. Aswathama is the son of Dronacharya, and Somadati or Hurisrava is the son of the king of Bahalikas. Karna is the half brother of Arjuna. He was born of Kunti before her marriage with King Pandu. Krupacharya's twin sister married Dronacharya. Now we will move to the next verse, that is chapter number 1, verse number 9. Translation. There are many other heroes who are prepared to lay down their lives for my sake. All of them are well equipped with different kinds of weapons and all are experienced in military science. But what? As far as the others are concerned, like Jayadratha, Kritavarma, and Salya, all are determined to lay down their lives for Duryodhana's sake. In other words, it is already concluded that all of them would die in the battle of Kurukshetra for joining the party of the sinful Duryodhana. Duryodhana was, of course, confident of his victory on account of the above mentioned combined strength of his friends. Now we move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 10. Translation. Our strength is immeasurable, and we are perfectly protected by grandfather Bhisma, whereas the strength of the Pandavas, carefully protected by Bhima, is limited. Purport. Herein, an estimation of comparative strength is made by Duryodhana. He thinks that the strength of his armed forces is immeasurable, being specifically protected by the most experienced general, grandfather Bhisma. On the other hand, the forces of the Pandavas are limited, being protected by a less experienced general, Bhima, who is like a fig in the presence of Bhisma. Duryodhan was always envious of Bhima because he knew perfectly well that if he should die at all, he would only be killed by Bhima. But at the same time, he was confident of his victory on account of the presence of Bhisma, who was a far superior general. His conclusion that he would come out of the battle victorious was well ascertained. Now we'll move to the next verse, that is chapter number 1, verse number 11. Translation. All of you must now give full support to grandfather Bhisma as you stand at your respective strategic points of entrance into the phalanx of the army. Purport. Duryodhan, after praising the prowess of Bhisma, further considered that others might think that they had been considered less important. So, in his usual diplomatic way, he tried to adjust the situation in the above words. He emphasized that Vismadeva was undoubtedly the greatest hero, but he was an old man, so everyone must especially think of his protection from all sides. He might become engaged in the fight, and the enemy might take advantage of his full engagement on one side. Therefore, it was important that other heroes not leave their strategic positions and allow the enemy to break the phalanx. Duryodhan clearly felt that the victory of the Kurus depended on the presence of Bhismadeva. He was confident of the full support of Bhismadev and Dronacharya in the battle because he well knew that they didn't even speak a word when Arjuna's wife Draupadi, in her helpless condition, had appealed to them for justice while she was being forced to appear naked in the presence of all the great generals in the assembly. Although he knew that the two generals had some sort of affection for the Pandavas, he hoped that these generals would now completely give it up as they had done during the gambling performances. Now we will move to the next verse, which is chapter number 1, verse number 12. Translation. Then Bhisma, the great valiant grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, the grandfather of the fighters, blew his conch-shell very loudly, making a sound like the roar of a lion, giving Duryodhana joy. Purport. The grandsire of the Kuru dynasty could understand the inner meaning of the heart of his grandson Duryodhana, and out of his natural compassion for him, he tried to cheer him by blowing his conch-shell very loudly, befitting his position as a lion. Indirectly, by the symbolism of the council, he informed his depressed grandson Duryodhan that he had no chance of victory in the battle because the Supreme Lord Krishna was on the other side. But still, it was his duty to conduct the fight, and no pains would be spared in that connection. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 1, verse number 13. Translation. After that, the consuls, drums, bugles, trumpets, and horns were all suddenly sounded, and the combined sound was tumultuous. So we will stop here in today's session. So now before we close the session, let's summarize what we have seen today's session. So today's session it was all about preparations for the war we have seen. And in the first sloka, we have seen Dhritarashtra's inquiry to Sanjay. And verse number 2 to 11, we have seen Duryodhana's fear and how the characteristics of his diplomacy in describing the armies and all. So Duryodhan goes to Dronacharya and he describes the warriors of the Pandavas army and his own army, and literally he compares both the armies. Then we have seen in this particular section, it is all about how the preparation for the war started. And in the next section, we will be seeing this different signs of victory. That is verse number 14 to verse number 20. So with that, we will close today's session. Thanks for joining in. Hare Krishna.